Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Hoping that you all are doing well this evening. We're going to be doing a little bit of theology on trial. We haven't done that in a minute. And we're going to be focusing on Razing Rafah. And so not only are we doing a little of theology on trial, we are doing a little of mythology on trial and also history on trial. We're going to address this topic of Rafah and why this particular topic is so important at this current time. Some of you may already be aware of why it is so important. One thing that is a little bit disconcerting, however, is that sometimes with these topics, it seems like they should have been covered extensively by a number of people, and chiefly those individuals who are identifying themselves as Hebrew Israelite. The question is, why don't we have this information? If you all are bringing the enlightenment that you all are claiming to bring, why don't we have this information? If you are challenging history, you are challenging theology, why don't we have this information on this place called Rafah? And the same question can be asked of those individuals who identify themselves as Bible believers, as church members, as Christians. Some of you who are identifying yourselves as Moors. Some people are identifying themselves as pastors and prophets. Why don't we have this information? It's not as if the information is hidden. The information is really on the surface. And so there should not be all of these questions about why is Rafah so important? What's the mystery behind Rafah? And so we see some headlines here. Why Israel is so determined to launch an offensive in Rafah and why so many oppose it. That's a very good question. Another headline, the strange mystery of the Rafah offensive. I want to point out something about Rafah before we go delving into Rafah. Rafah is a part of what is known as the land of promise. Hence the question about why we don't have more information about Rafah and why this offensive is so important. What's the mystery behind it? Why don't we have the information? This seems like this should be a general topic that people are considering in these various spiritual and religious circles when we get into it. And so here we have additional headlines about this place called Rafah and this intended invasion of Rafah. One thing to note about Rafah is that the refugees over there went to Rafah. They were told to go to Rafah in order to be safe. And now the plan on the table is to invade Rafah and execute an assault on Rafah. And there are many people around the world that are articulating concerns about this because of the level of devastation that would be tied to this invasion of Rafah. And we are talking about civilians. And so you see these headlines coming from all over the place. I need you to pay attention to the screen. These headlines are coming from all over the place about the implications of going into Rafah. And so the question is, why is this place so important? There have been answers to this. There have been all sorts of offerings regarding why this is strategically such an important place to invade, even after the people have been directed, herded into this particular location. And here again, you can see these headlines related to Rafah and the warnings associated with invading this particular place. And again, here you see these headlines indicating that there is a determination to invade and assault Rafah, even with international pressure to the contrary. And so again, people are asking, why is there such determination to go into and destroy essentially Rafah? And so not only is there a determination to go into Rafah, regardless of how negotiations turn out, there is a pledge to enter Rafah. Again, what's so important about Rafah? Now, I will tell you that historically, Rafah has had a particular meaning in the church. And so the church, whether we are talking about those who are Old Testament, New Testament, church members, Messianic, this name has had a specific meaning, and we're going to go into it. It is supposed to be one of the names of the God in the Bible. And so, again, when people hear this and they hear about the plans to invade Rafah, why hasn't there been more communication about the significance of Rafah biblically? And so first, what we're going to do is we're going to look at exactly where Rafah happens to be located. And this is very interesting for those individuals who believe that the promised land is actually in the Americas. There is sufficient indication that all of this really belongs in the East. And so what we're going to see when we look at Rafah is that Rafah is not spread out like you see some of these names like Memphis and things like that. Rafah is in a particular region. And so we don't see any manifestations of Rafah in the Americas. And so Rafah, this location name, is indicated in three places, Afghanistan being one, and the other two are essentially the same. And so one is in Palestine and one is Egypt. And so we are talking about that Rafah right now that is related to that sort of shared space with Palestine and Egypt. And this is just so that you can see a small map of this particular area. And here you can see the three places that this Rafah place exists in the world. And you can see there's an overlap with the Palestine Rafah and the Egypt Rafah. And here you can see another depiction of Rafah and its proximity to other places that are on the map. And by the way, the name Rafah is a part of that root for the name Raphael. Okay, so let's talk about this whole dynamic of this plan to raise Rafah. And this type of raising is the RAZ type of raising with respect to Rafah. And so when someone is talking about raising a location, RAZ, they are talking about demolishing it, wrecking it, ruining it, laying waste, flattening, complete devastation. And so that's what's going on in terms of the plan for Rafah. And so before we go any further, what do you think the symbolism is of the face depicted in this whole narrative that we are dealing with right here. And so this is a depiction of some of the raising that has been going on. And apparently, this raising has been going on for longer than the world has been paying attention. And so this right here is apparently not new. And so this raising, this demolishing, this wholesale demolition has been going on for quite a while. And here we see more indication of what it means to raise. More depictions of the raising that is continuously going on over there. You know, an elder recently asked, why are they always fighting over there? Why are there places on the earth where they essentially don't have wars? And so, what's going on over there? Now, of course, there is the family battle narrative. But there is a question about, is that all that is going on? Is this just a family battle that just, goes on and on and on? It's a good question and it deserves an answer. And it's not just over there, because the over here is also involved in the over there. And so it's very hard to have a clear line of demarcation for when over here and over there are distinct. And so there is some melding going on between the over here and the over there. But again, here we see additional depictions of this raising dynamic with the RAZ. And here we have more raising. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit here with respect to the raising, and we are also going to address the other raising that is related to this place called Rafah. And so what we see, perhaps not surprisingly, is that this whole idea of raising, Razing, of Rafah, is tied to the raising, Raising, of hell. Yes, the raising of Rafah is equivalent to the raising of hell. So, what do we mean when we say raising hell? It's an idiom. I'm sure you've heard it before, perhaps even used it. And so, the standard understanding, according to Cambridge, when someone is raising hell, is to behave in a way that is not controlled and that causes trouble. And so that's one understanding, and that's definitely what appears to be planned in this particular situation. But there's another dynamic going on with respect to the raising of hell, and we're going to talk about that. And so for those of you who are identifying as Christian, identifying as Jews, identifying as Muslims, pay close attention. So we are looking at this construct of raising hell and the relationship between raising hell and raising Rafah. And so if you look at this construct of raising, the Raising, it's another way of saying elevating something, eliciting something. And so you can just put those in place of this construct of raising with respect to this construct of HE double toothpick. Now, before we delve into the nuances of Rafah, we are just going to quickly look at what's generally offered with respect to Rafah in the Old Testament. It's generally understood as the God that heals. And so you will often hear people say Jehovah Rapha, or we've talked about Jehovah Sidkenu before, Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Shalom. And so this particular one is supposed to be the one that heals, the one that cures, And so it's very odd that it also means something completely different. But we shouldn't be surprised because we've seen this over time, this weird dynamic of words meaning the opposite. So we see all of these antonyms floating around, and this is one of those examples. And so Rapha, when first looking into it, it was a little odd. It was like, why are they going over there to assault Rapha, given the meaning of the name and given what would be assumed would be the understanding of the people who would be engaging in this invasion. Why invade the place that is associated with the God that heals? And you see very clearly here, Jehovah Rapha is the Lord who heals, or the Lord your healer. And you see the same thing at 7495 Strong's, Rapha, to heal. The expanded definition includes become fresh, completely healed, healed, healer, physician, purified, repaired, taken care. And so all of these things that are related to nurturance, essentially. And here you see where it's indicated that this is literally of God. And here you see it again. It's about mending and repairing, making whole. That means being healthy, related to physician, to cure, to cause, to heal, yet again. But not surprisingly, some other things come up when you try to do a direct translation to get a sense of what this word is all about. And initially, it does come up as healer, a healer. But when you pull down all of the transliterations that are in that Rapha entry, some other things start to come up. And so you initially have this idea of Rapha, a healer, healers, and then it switches to ghosts. You see down below reverends, but again, ghost and ghost. And so, of course, the question is, what does healer have to do with ghost? What does Rapha have to do with ghost? How is this a part of the transliteration? They don't really seem to hang together, but they are together. And so we're going to look at why this word means these various things and the implications for this Rapha invasion. And so we have here this next entry for Rapha, Beth Rapha, indicating it is an Israelite name, this Beth Rapha. And we're going to look at a little bit more information about this Beth Rapha and how things start to switch from this Lord that heals to this whole dynamic of raising Cain, essentially. And so, consistent with what we see on the map today and what we have in terms of understanding the geography in that part of the world, it is located currently in the general vicinity of what historically, biblically, was referred to as Judah. Now, there were two kingdoms operating, the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel. These were not synonymous, and so you had certain tribes that were a part of this kingdom of Judah, and then you had certain tribes that were a part of this kingdom of Israel. They had different kings, different tribes, different collectives of people. And so this particular Rapha was located in this area known as Judah, the kingdom of Judah. And so that whole Beth construct is about house. Sometimes that's what Beth means. And in this instance, this Beth Rapha, who is identified as an Israelite, this word, this name means, in this particular iteration, house of the giant or house of giant, with Rapha now meaning giant. So Rapha has gone from meaning healer to what we saw with one transliteration, ghost. And now we see this manifestation including giant. And so house of giant or house of the giant. And so you can see there are a few transitions going on here. Now, before we go any further, I want to point out that this whole idea of giants, this is indicated in the book of Deuteronomy. And so you see here where these different collectives that are also identified as previously being in that location. You have Moab, you have Ammon. They had names for these giants. And so we've talked about the Anakim or the Anaki before. That, of course, is related to Enoch and Noah. And so the Moabites had a name for the giants. The Ammonites had a name for the giants. The uh, kingdom of Judah apparently had an idea of a giant. And so this idea of giant um, was known in that particular region. And there is the narrative that that's where the giants were. I don't know if you recall, there was a program previously called Land of the Giants. And so this would be the land of the giants. And here in Deuteronomy again, you see these indications. And this time it's the Ammonites and what they call these giants that dwelled in the land. And here at 7497 Strongs, we see that this Rapha is indicated as an area that is east of the Jordan. And if you look to the right, you see another spelling for Rapha, which again is very interesting, that Rephaim. And so here, according to the biblical narrative and some other narratives, this is the proper name of a people, old race of giants. The word powerlessness is associated with this construct, which is very odd because, again, when talking about giants, there is the idea of power, of huge size. And so it also indicates that this was in that ancient land of Canaan. So these were the ancient inhabitants of Canaan. And so it's very interesting that this would also be the promised land, that this is seen as the holy land by a number of people around the world. And again, this is supposed to be that whole land of promise that's passed down from generation to generation, from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And so this is that place. But if you look at old maps, what you'll see is you have a number of these collectives, related collectives that are around each other in terms of where their people are situated. And so you will see Moab on the map. You will see Judah on the map. You will see the Philistines on the map. So you will see different entities on the map that are pretty much on the map right now. But again, it's just very interesting that this is the promised land, because this land, based upon some of the narratives related to it being the land of Canaan, there's a lot of desecration that took place in relation to the land versus consecration. And so that's just an interesting observation. Now let's look at this a little bit more closely. And again, indicating pay attention, Christians, Jews, and Muslims, as we look at this whole dynamic of Razing Rafah with the Razing. And so what we find consistent with that translation at 7496 Strongs for this entry is that Rafah indeed is related to this construct of ghost. And so not only is it related to it, that's the actual translation. It's the same word. And so we have shades, that's another word for Rafah, and ghosts. And so let's look a little bit more closely at this. And so the place that will be invaded is the place of ghost or shades. And consistent with that depiction that you need to pay attention to, Rafah is also understood as meaning sunken, powerless ones. It is another name for Sheol, related to the earth casting forth something from this particular space, this particular name. Continuing on, we see that Rafah is another word for death or the dead. And so it's related to Sheol, and that's where the people, according to this narrative, that's where they go after they leave the earth. And so Rafah is that place. Rafah is the people. Rafah is the ghost. And here we have these additional constructs related to Rafah, including to be faint. This idea of fallen ones, ceasing, abating, slack, slothful, again, failing, fallen. And here we see very clearly this Rafah to Sheol connection. And it's indicating here that this, again, is the place to which people descend when they leave the earth. And this particular construct is mentioned 66 times in the Old Testament. And so Sheol, Rafah, is another way of saying this place of inquiry. Hallow, Holly, and again, hell, the underworld. Another thing that stands out is that Rafah is also associated with this idea of an insatiable monster, a dark and gloomy place without return. And finally, Rafah, Sheol, is related to the construct of wicked and wasting away. And here you see Rafah, Sheol, associated with the idea of depths, the construct of the pit. And what's also interesting is that this is related to this idea of extreme degradation in sin. And in Isaiah 57:9, it's indicated as a place of exile for Israel. And so that in and of itself is very interesting in terms of this whole idea of the location of Rafah, and also Judah, that tribe called Judah, or the kingdom of Judah, having this dynamic of the house of the giant, this house of Rafah. And so again, also meaning this idea of the pit. And so you can see why this whole idea of raising Rafah, R-A-Z, is synonymous with raising, R-A-I-S, hell. And here you see very clearly that it means, it's translating as grave, hell, pit, this whole construct of Sheol. And this takes us again back to that whole idea of Rafah and ghost and deceased and fallen ones. It is indicated here as this subterranean retreat. The grave, the pit, and hell. And here you can see some of the etymologies associated with this whole Sheol dynamic related to one who covers up to conceal. And we've talked about that whole dynamic of cover and conceal and it translating to this construct of hell. And here it indicates the infernal regions again. And also, if you look down and to the left, you see a variation of that construct of Nephilim. And you see Nephelheim also associated with this construct of the netherworld and hell. Also Sheol, also Rapha, essentially. And so what we see is that this whole construct of Rapha is associated with this entire construct of hell. And here you see various transliterations of this construct of Sheol. And notably, also identified in that part of the world is the place called Megiddo. And Megiddo, it's postulated that this is a location that is associated with an end time spiritual battle, a sort of final battle, a battle of Armageddon. Okay. And so this idea of an apocalyptic sort of battle also in the same proximity. And so we are still left with that question of why Rafah? Why does anyone need to invade Rafah? What is under Rafah? One thing to note is that what's called the Cave of the Patriarchs is also supposed to be in that region. And so that's where the patriarchs are supposed to be buried. And so we are talking about in relation to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, that cave of the patriarchs. And so there is that question about what exactly happens when you when you demolish Rafah. What exactly is the end game? What's the ultimate goal? And these are questions that people need to be asking, whether they are Christians, whether they are Jews, whether they are Muslims. What is that all about? What exactly is being raised while Rafa is being raised? It's important to note as we wrap this up that not everyone is interested in war. Not everyone studies war. Not everyone is interested in destruction. And so the average human being is not interested in these things. The average human being is just going about life essentially. And so individuals who study war, who are into war, who want to engage in war, who wage war, those individuals are few. And their focus on war is an outgrowth of their focus on destruction. And what you see manifested in the world is a manifestation of what people have inside of them. And so if someone is studying war, they are thinking about war, constantly wanting to wage war, it's because that's what's inside of them. War is hell. And so if someone is obsessed with war, what is inside of them is hell. And what they are doing when they are instigating war, waging war, they are bringing forth the hell that is in them to meet up with the rest of the hell that is already present. And so that's what this whole dynamic of Rafa is all about. It is something straight from the pit of hell, and the destruction that would come about with it is tied to the manifestation of a God complex where some individuals want to have the fate of the world the fate of other people, the fate of humanity, the fate of the earth. They want to have that in their hands. They want to be God. They want to wage war with what they understand to be God. And so when you hear all of this rhetoric about invading Rafah, you know now that what is really going on with the razing of Rafah is the raising of hell.